Welcome everyone to a new episode of the FinOps Weekly podcast, and today we are going to deep dive into cost allocation, governance, and data platforms. And for doing that, we have Sonal Gupta from Casberg, their FinOps lead. Sonal, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. So, she's calling just before going to FinOps London, and we're going to have a brief time talking about the different problems that we are raising on cost allocation, on governance, and on data platform. So, just to start, maybe you can walk us through your journey and how you've been working on these areas, especially in cost allocation, and let the audience know who you are and where what your work has been done on FinOps.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me here, Victor. I think it's always a pleasure to be a part of such useful podcast where interaction is more like on the personal side as well. My name is Sonal. I am working as a FinOps lead in Carlsberg Group from last 7 years now. And during my journey in Carlsberg, we have done quite a lot in FinOps, in establishing FinOps to the adoption to evolving FinOps, with the use of the framework, all the principles and domain. I am working with my Cloud Center of Excellence and other stakeholders in Carlsberg. We are part of Global Hosting and Network Organization, and we report to the CTO organization. So it's the typical hierarchy we are following in Carlsberg. I have a small team. I have 3 consultants that works for me. And we support business in day-to-day FinOps operations. That includes cost visibility, transparency, recommendations, suggestions. We are also working on shift left strategy. Recently, we have started working with data platform team. Also tagging allocation policies and so on. So there has been quite a lot that we had done since 2019. I am based in Oslo, Norway, and yeah, my team is pretty international, and that's who I am.
No, that's great, and we are going to dive into those topics. So you have all that experience, and I'm sure you are going to help the audience definitely on what we talked about. So let's just start with cost allocation. So it's very evergreen topic here in FinOps. So maybe we can start with a specific question, which is like working us through a allocation model that actually worked from your experience, and what actually made the team or the company actually accept it.
Yeah. So in Carlsberg, last year actually we had worked on Azure Backup cost allocation because that was
Mm-hmm.
one of the pain point that finance highlighted from their side because um, they were not able to allocate the cost to the shared resource pool Azure Backup cost, right? So in Carlsberg, we have multiple recovery vaults, and we are
Mm-hmm.
taking the backup of multiple applications via those recovery vaults. So it's not a setup where typically we have one recovery vault for one applications because it will be then very difficult to manage. So now it was very difficult until last year, Q4, to allocate the cost of backup to different applications, different businesses, and it has always been the challenge. We
Mm-hmm.
were working with optimizing backup and storage costs, but at the same time, it was still a challenge to allocate the cost to the right stakeholders or the right teams. As you know, data was growing, retention, we had different retention period for different applications and so on. So then we, as a FinOps team, set together, we thought a lot, how do we tackle this situation? And um, first of all, what we did was we extracted all the Azure Backup Recovery Vaults data from Azure portal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's entire data volume, like how much GB we have data stored in these recovery vaults for each of these applications. And then we found out like what is my protected instance cost, what is my VM count, what is my redundancy, it's on GRS or LRS and things like that. Because every setup, every configuration has got a different pricing.
Mhm.
So we extracted that, and then we calculated the cost. Typically, it's the pricing calculator we used. Total cost, total data protected instance cost from the Azure calculator, and then into the total backup size. So that kind of calculation method we use. And then, of course, we worked on the tagging part as well. Make sure that all the applications, all the recovery walls, everything that we have is small elements of Azure Backup is properly tagged. So we find out that this backup size belongs to this application. So that's a typical cost allocation model we built in Carlsberg. And as a result of that, we are now able to see how much backup this particular application or how much backup size this particular application is having and how much cost it generates. So that kind of segregation we have been able to provide to finance, and that have been truly helpful for them.
That's a very, very specific and very interesting case of cost allocation. And I know from my talks with Alfonso, who is the one hosting the FinOps Azure cost course, which like he's very into specifics, and I'm sure he'll love to know more about that model. And talking about what you've said, I see that it's a very specific and a very granular model. So how granular actually you think cost allocation should be? And is there a point where it's too much detail and it's too much information? What do you think?
I think when it comes to granularity, it depends like what kind of service you're talking about, right? Like some service needs more granular view, some service needs, not so much granular view, right? For you to understand your cost. Uh, if I take the same example, Azure Backup, I think you need to know how much data, for example, you have protected, like what's the size of your protected data, plus what is the retention duration you have, what kind of redundancy setup you have, right? So this is super important for you to calculate the overall cost of your backup. And that's why, in such kind of scenarios, you need to be more granular as compared to other services. And the other example is the data platforms, where you need to understand how much workspace or how many workspaces you have, what kind of queries you use, how many DBU hours you are consuming in order to calculate your Databricks costs, right? So it depends really.
Yeah, no, no, for sure. I think it really depends on the case, especially on also who is seeing this information. But mostly for FinOps, it really depends on the scope of the tool and the scope of the approach. Because if you want to, of course, as much like as much low information you can get, then you can always hide it and calculate properly, right? It's definitely just how you show. Then it's how you show the information, but you need to be as accurate as possible, right?
Exactly. And you need to talk the same language. Like, I would definitely like to avoid the situation where I'm providing more granular data, more technical data, but the stakeholders or the business is not able to understand, and they are, in fact, more confused with the data. So I think the alignment is very, very important here. What you are presenting should be understandable to them instead of presenting everything which doesn't make sense to them.
Yeah, true. You need to present what you need, and you get to get the insight from the granularity that you already have. So I think that's super interesting, and I want to move to a different, like, but also very important topic, which is governance. So you have a lot of experience in FinOps, and you probably have seen like multiple models and learn about multiple cases. So for you, what does how does a good governance model look like, versus what most people have or most discussion have? What's good for you in governance?
I think in my perspective, a good vision and strategy alignment is something that should be a part of your good FinOps governance. And what I mean by that is the alignment of technology spending with your business objectives, business strategies, and make sure that you define clear policies, you define guidance, you define toolkits, you define life cycle management, for example, commitments. And also, I think FinOps governance is not just about cloud, but it's about other scopes as well. So it's your cloud, it's your SaaS, it's your AI hybrid on-prem, now data platform. So it's about all of that. And then also, I think it's very important for a good governance is to define the ownership of cloud and your spend to different business unit levels, different applications, different projects, and then also accountability. I think good governance should bring a sense of accountability, wherein everybody feels accountable for their spend, for their deployment. And then you can do that via defining policies, by defining cost centers, tagging, standardization, workflows, and so on. And then you can also set escalation paths, decision rights, ownership, also required services versus the restricted services. I think this is something that I use a lot in my current practice. What is required versus what is restricted. And then different type of commitment policies, you have reservations, you have savings plan, you have licensing. I think it's one of the area where we are spending a lot of money, so it's important that we have full control there. Also different kind of guardrails. We talk about security, we talk about coding, we talk about different kind of development setups. And I think in order to maintain all of that, you need to have like a risk monitoring, like a continuous monitoring in place. I think that is also something very important in a good governance.
No, I agree, and I think the last point that you mentioned about the monitoring, we saw it in the one of our, let's say, on the governance course, the tagging course, that we had like a dashboard where you can see how many of the resources that you have are compliant with your policy, and then you can decide about auto remediation, or flagging people, or sending alerts to people about to remediate those governance issues that you have. But I think governance is also helpful to define what the company wants, like the ideal model, especially, and then you can put automation in place to be able to achieve that, or send alerts, or make enable people to know, okay, here's the desired state that we have, this is the policy that we are going to follow, and then you need to make compliance with it. So definitely that monitoring and that dashboarding, so you can see how are situations, because we normally think of it like governance. Yeah, we have to tag everything, blah blah, all these ideas. But then if you are not able to quickly see it and how it is, then it's not the ideal situation, right? You need to be able to, in a place, like, see how your governance is looking.
Yeah.
And one of the things that with governance and policies and all of that is sometimes it generates kind of a blocker to engineering and to development to comply with this governance while developing and creating new features or fixing stuff. So how do you think you can create governance that protects budget and makes it FinOps oriented, so it's optimized, without blocking the development and the advancement of the company?
I think understanding their needs is a key here, and what I mean by that is not understanding the technical needs of it, because you are not a technical person, but understanding the essence of it, like what they are actually trying to do here, what they are trying to achieve, what they are trying to build. I think if you're coming from that sort of mindset, it becomes easier for you to translate what you can recommend to them, and then what they can do from their side, and then come on some sort of common ground that, okay. And data is also super useful here. You have a design from them, you have an architecture for them, you have some sort of requirements from them. What you can do, you can just grasp all of that, transform that into your own FinOps language, and see if that makes sense, and if we can change something, some configuration or something, because you can apply best practices, you can apply your principles there and recommend the solutions to them. And then, with the help of data, you can also provide cost variation to them. If this is cost effective or not cost effective, what alternative solution do you have? And that's what I said. It's the required versus the restricted, solutions. So definitely for business critical applications, if it is absolutely required, you need to then come up with some sort of business value analysis, right? If you are not done, if you are not thinking from that perspective, then whatever you will deploy, or if you are deploying some really heavy workloads, you will not get the desired results if you have not done your full analysis of how much value it will generate in the long term. And I think in organizations, we always think of the short term, and hence,
Hmm.
like, when you think short term, it creates a lot of chaos, because then you try to manipulate things every now and then you play with the scalability, you play with the stability, you play with the performance, which obviously is not what business wants. So I think if you think in the long term, you can think from a broader perspective, that how much value it will generate in 2 years or 3 years time. And then comes your commitments, because then you have like a proper strategy in place. You can quickly commit to your workloads to get immediate savings. And I think that can be further reinvested in your other deployments or other projects. So I think strategy here is most important, plus understanding their needs, what is their mindset, what they are trying to do is something that is a key.
Yeah, I agree, and I also say that what you mentioned is to governance is especially linked to business, because you need to build like a long-term system that makes see you the future of the company, and make the what you mentioned achievable, and not to play in the short term, like, yeah, let's do this or let's do that and let's achieve this quarter goal, and then don't focus on anything else. So what you mentioned about building on the system and building something that relies on the long term, I think it's really really good advice for companies, and not to try and unblock anyone, and also to define like with all the pieces, because you need to have this compliance part, and then you have the engineering working with it, and then of course the FinOps and the finance being reported on, and being able to see all this information. So I think that's a really great approach. And other topics, and final, maybe with the FinOps Foundation update that we have recently on the framework. One of the changes was the scopes, and within these scopes is something that we've talked about, which is the data platform, right? So there is a lot of investment and a lot of costs generated in data platforms. And you mentioned it before, right? So what do you think from your perspective makes different to manage data platform costs, and makes it a little bit harder than the regular cloud infra?
For me, I think tagging your data platforms properly, like you do in the typical scenarios,
Hmm.
is still a challenging thing, because if you have a proper tagging in place, tagging governance in place, you can still, identify cost to some extent. But still, it's still a challenge. Like, how do you tag your queries? How do you tag your workspaces? How do you tag your different elements that you use in data platforms? And many companies are actually struggling with that because they do not have a proper tagging practice in place. Plus, the query fine tuning that happens, the performance tuning that happens in the data platform world, I think it's also one of the challenging thing. What we have done in Carlsberg is we have built a report on our Databricks and Fabric environment. We are using Fabric's metrics app as well in order to visualize the consumption of our compute and storage um, and your capacities. So basically, it's the capacity utilization that you see in the Fabrics metrics app, how much you are consuming. If there is a space to delete some of the ideal workspaces, you do that, right? But the cost allocation is still a challenge. Okay, fine. You have a workspace that is shared between different teams, right? And they are using the same workspace, and they have different, capacities, or let's say shared capacity that you are using, and you have different workspaces you have built in that capacity. How do you allocate the how do you know who is using what? I think that's where the challenge comes. But if you have proper tagging in place, you can tackle with that situation to some extent. What we have done in Databricks environment, we have built a report that actually gives you the visibility of how many workspaces do you have, and then who is executing the queries. So we have like the names of the query executor populating there in that column, and then you have how many DView hours that particular query or particular workspace have consumed. And then you have two separate columns for amortized cost versus your pay-as-you-go cost, because we have done some reservations on Databricks environment. And then you get the overall costing of your workspaces. Okay, so this particular workspace is costing us this much. So that kind of granularity we have been able to build in that report. But again, without tagging, this wouldn't have been possible, or we won't know. And in that report, we observe that a lot of things, workspaces, for example, the naming convention is not right, or something is wrong, and we are not able to identify the right cost for that workspace. So we still have that challenge, and I think what we are currently focusing on labeling them properly, so that we get the accurate view on our tools or on our reports, in order to provide more visibility, more transparency to the stakeholders.
That's really interesting that after all everything goes back to tagging and to for allocation, and it's interesting to see the problems that they have. So in that part, I also see like a lot of focus on the query like unit, as of being able to measure and the cost based on the query unit, the amount of cost that each query has, and then being able to build up from there. So I think those are really good advice for people that are handling that, because there is a lot of importance lately on this topic. And can you maybe bring us to a problem, apart one of the problems that you have solved apart from this related to tagging, related to data platforms? What was the challenge? What was the approach? If you have an example for that.
um I would just sort of correlate my answer with my previous answer about Databricks. So one of the things we sort of currently worked on is identifying the cost of the amortized cost of your Databricks workspaces. So for example, we have, like, let's say 10 workspaces. Uh, Business wanted to know how much I'm saving when it comes to paying amortized cost versus if I had not reserved anything, like let's say pay as you go cost. So that kind of visibility we had been able to provide. And also, let's say if we are using 100 million DBU hours, how many hours we have already consumed, how many is left, and then if we had not reserved any of the DBU hours, how much we had been paying as pay as you go cost versus how much we are paying if we had reserved it already. So this kind of granularity we have been able to provide. Also in Fabrics environments, the there was a lot of cleanup that needed to be done. Last year we had seen that our fabrics cost spiked up all of a sudden in the month of April, and nobody had a clue what happened and why it happened and so on, because in 2024, I think end of 2024, we moved from Power BI Pro licenses to Fabric workspaces, Fabric capacities, and the transition that should have happened properly did not happen properly, and everybody was like jumping on Fabric and creating their workspaces without knowing the consequences, without knowing the impact. So we ended up having a lot of unnecessary workspaces creation, queries, and people were just using Fabric platform as if it was free, because they did not have a clue. So then in April month, there was this huge spike that happened in Fabric environment. We caught that because finance highlighted that, plus we also monitored that. Then then we formed a work stream, a small work stream around that. How do we control that cost? Because that was just simply increasing, and business had a lot of requirements around using Fabric more and more. Then there was a talk of consolidating all the data platforms and just stick to Fabric and Databricks. So then FinOps team, together with Microsoft, together with our cloud team and stakeholders, we decided, okay, let's go step by step. Let's first find out all the ideal workspaces, all the ideal capacities, and then work on deleting all of them, get some savings from there, and then finding out if there is a room for us to downsize the capacity. So from F64 to F6, for example. So that kind of work we did in that work stream. And I think that actually significantly reduced and controlled our Fabric cost. So now at least we know, we have a process. So anybody who's deploying any Fabric workspace or any capacity in the environment, they will have to check if there is an opportunity for them to reserve that capacity. What is the requirement? What is that you were trying to deploy, meaning the architecture and so on. And then fourth is like, if there is a chance to sort of to reserve it, like you come with a long-term plan, and then once you have that plan, you can just immediately reserve your capacity to get more savings. So that kind of process we had built, and now, and it's working well. But again, like, it's just a matter of one wrong decision or one bad decision, and all your work is like then all your efforts and all your work get screwed up. So you need to continuously monitor your environment. So that's what we are doing. So we did a lot of work around that. We did a lot of work around Databricks, and now we have done a lot of reservations on SQL managed instance as well. But it requires a lot of coordination with the stakeholders. And I think the key, the key to get success in that is you should have a right strategy in place. You cannot be okay, we don't know yet. Maybe it's for 1 month, maybe it's for 3 months. Then you can't really have a standardized process in place, I think.
No, I agree, and I see that, normally, like, we always want to have like the system built before the, let's say, the issue or the crash. But sometimes the best, systems happen, sadly, after you have a problem or you have a major incident, and then you build the system to make it not happen again. So, and then what you mentioned, no, the case that you said, a spike, unexpected, then how you prevent that, how you make it that from avoid that from happening. So especially with data platforms that you are, one query away to mess it up, or to, analyze the whole database, or do a lot of costs. And especially because it felt like, I feel like whenever I'm dealing with data platforms, it's more like, feels more innocent. So you don't see like with queries, it's just a query. So we've been doing like queries with databases for a long time, and we didn't care about the amount of data that you were returning, especially only for performance. But now you are having to take into account the cost that each of the queries have, and the all those details that we like me from talking with from the DBA perspective is like we don't care. We just care about performance and if this query is better or faster or however. But now you have to add the cost, and that also makes like even more difficult to handle and another thing to control. But again, it's great that you built all the system in place. I think a lot of people can now leverage your case to be able to avoid spikes in in their workloads. And I wanted to also one question that the people I think may have is these are multi-tenant platforms, so you can tackle multiple places in the same with Snowflake or Databricks. So how are you able to properly allocate costs, maybe these cross provider situations, and also being able to join them properly because they are related to data platforms, but one Databricks uses DBUs, then Snowflake use one thing, then maybe you have BigQuery and that's another thing. So how are you being able to handle that?
I think what we have seen as a challenge when tackling tackling multiple data platforms is like understanding from the data that SaaS provider provides. I think that's where we can do a lot of improvements. And what we have done or we are doing is we have a tool and we are trying to integrate that with all the data platforms, Databricks, Fabric, whatever, with the APIs, right? And whatever the API calls can get us as a data sets, we are using that in our own billing ingestion to create something meaningful, something understandable, something like more clear. Because if you look
Mm.
at the SaaS data, like all these SaaS providers provide, they are not like too much granular. They are not like too much transparent. So then our job is to then make it more readable, make it more understandable. However, there are still a lot of challenges we are facing. For example, Snowflake is a completely different, sort of, it has different elements that you need to sort of understand versus Databricks versus Fabrics. But our aim is to bring this into one data governance process that can help us govern all these different data platforms that we are using. Um, Also, I think we are also focusing more on the quick wins, and the quick win is just reserve them for 1 year, 3 year to get immediate savings, and then work on different optimization processes, deleting the idle workspaces, and fine tuning your queries, making sure you're using the right capacities, right SKUs, and so on. But yeah. I think from my perspective, it is still a challenge to tackle these data platforms, multiple data platforms, because every data platform has got different cost element to look into.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's always about, data normalization, even though we have initiatives such as Focus and similars, it's very difficult and I don't think providers make it like super easy to be able to do so, and there is always a try to and a work to make that happen. But it's also great that you shared the commitments strategy because they are not being like a lot discussed in the data platforms perspective, whether we know them from the normal providers. And it's good that big companies especially that can leverage a lot the big spend to make some savings with some good commitment strategy. They can think about it. Okay, let's work on commitments for data platforms so that they can save some money without not much effort apart from having a great strategy to not overcommit, because there is always this risk. There's this risk of overcommitment, right? So it's a great tip. And I think with that we have covered like three major topics. So I think you have said a lot of actionable insights on your end. So thanks, Donald, for sharing your knowledge with us, and hope you have a great FinOps day in London. Looking forward to meeting you soon. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. Always my pleasure.
Thanks, and see you in the next episode. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.